The day my name disappeared from the company I built, no one told me. I found out the same way everyone else did, from a press release. Cold. Official. Printed on a page that still had my signature on the bottom. Boss Capital is pleased to announce the complete acquisition of Hartwell Foods. The founding team has graciously stepped aside. Graciously stepped aside. I remember reading those words 3 times. Then I set the paper down. Picked up my coffee. And I smiled. Not because I was okay. But because the last time someone underestimated me this badly, I turned a 2-room kitchen into a $50 million brand. They thought they had won. They hadn't even started paying the price. My name is Elena Hartwell, and I want you to understand something before this story goes any further. I did not inherit this company. I did not marry into it. I did not get lucky. I built Hartwell Foods on a 16-hour-a-day schedule, in a rented kitchen smaller than most people's bathrooms. I worked through a pregnancy. I worked through 2 failed bank loans. I worked through a fire that burned our first storage unit to nothing. Every single person who worked for us, 217 employees at our peak, they trusted me. They took lower salaries in the early years because I promised them something real. A piece of something that actually meant something. And for 11 years, I kept that promise. Until Marcus Voss walked through the door and offered to help me grow faster. I thought he was a partner. He was a predator in a suit. Marcus Voss had a gift. He could make you feel like the smartest person in the room right up until the moment he emptied it. He came in as a minority investor. Quiet. Respectful. Showing up to board meetings with ideas, charts, connections. For 6 months, everything he touched seemed to turn to gold. Revenue climbed. New distribution deals landed. The press started calling Hartwell Foods a success story. What I didn't see, what I was too exhausted and too trusting to notice, was that he was quietly moving pieces into place. He brought in his own legal team to streamline our paperwork. He suggested I take a real vacation for the first time in years. He volunteered to handle a round of investor calls while I was away. Every one of those things, on its own, seemed generous. Together, they were a trap I had already walked into. I came back from that trip to find Marcus had called an emergency shareholder meeting, the kind that requires only 48 hours notice if you control enough votes. And somehow, through contracts I had signed in exhaustion, through clauses I hadn't read closely enough, through moves that had been planned while I was thanking him for his support, he did. In a single afternoon, my ownership stake was diluted to near nothing. A new board was installed. A new CEO announcement was already drafted. My name was removed from the letterhead that same week. 217 people who called me their boss now reported to a man who had never once made a product with his hands. Employees who had stuck by me for a decade received emails from strangers. And Marcus Voss stood at the front of a room and told them this was an exciting new chapter. I sat in my car outside the building that night and I stared at the door I had painted with my own hands 11 years ago. Then I started making calls. I won't pretend the months that followed were clean or brave. There were nights I didn't sleep. Mornings I couldn't get out of bed. People I considered friends stopped returning calls because they didn't want to be on the wrong side of Marcus Voss's money. I spent everything I had left on a lawyer who told me, gently, that my case was possible but hard. That these things took years. That Voss had likely done this before and would do it again. I remember asking her, "Have you ever seen someone like him actually lose?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I've only seen them lose when the person they wronged refused to disappear." That night, I stopped crying. And I started documenting everything. Revenge that screams gets silenced. Revenge that whispers, that rewrites the rules beneath someone's feet, that lasts. I had no money left to fight with loudly. So I fought quietly. Methodically. I began talking to former employees. Not to recruit them or inflame them, just to listen. And what I heard painted a picture Voss had never wanted anyone to see. Contracts changed without authorization. Supplier relationships broken by pressure. A toxic culture spreading through every hallway of the company I had raised. People started sending me documents, emails, screenshots. Not because I asked, but because the truth was already moving, and it was looking for a door. I found that door through a retired accountant named Douglas, who had been quietly watching Boss's fund structure for 2 years, and who had found something that made my case look very small by comparison. What Douglas showed me changed everything. Hartwell Foods was not a single target. Boss Capital had done this to 7 companies in 6 years. Same playbook, different names. Come in as a lifeline. Build trust. Move quietly. Strip out the founders. Extract the value. Leave behind a shell with confused employees and confused suppliers. Dozens of people like me. Dozens of companies built on years of sacrifice, handed to a man who had never sacrificed anything. This was no longer about getting my company back. This was about stopping something that had broken too many people who were told no one would believe them. I reached out to the other founders. Some of them were afraid. A few had signed settlements with silence clauses. But 3 of them, 3 people who had lost everything the same way I had, said yes. We put together a case that took 11 months and almost broke every single one of us. But we finished it. The day the story broke, I was sitting in a diner 2 blocks from the courthouse. My lawyer called at 7:42 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had been sitting there since 6, too anxious to eat, watching the door. She said, "It's done. He can't run." The investigation, federal, not civil, moved faster than any of us expected once the full pattern was laid out. Wire fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty. Securities violations that went back years. Things that had nothing to do with me personally, but that my documentation had helped unlock. Marcus Voss walked out of a government building that afternoon and into a crowd of cameras. No smile. No charm. Just a man finally standing in a light he could not dim. And somewhere across the city, 217 people got a call telling them the company they worked for was under new oversight. That their benefits were protected. That someone had been watching out for them. I did not get a dramatic moment. No speech. No trophy. What I got was a phone call from a 34-year-old woman named Sophie who had worked in our shipping department since the beginning. She said, "I want you to know my daughter asks about you." We told her the story. That was it. That was the thing that undid me. Not the legal outcome. Not the money I eventually recovered. Not even seeing Boss's name in the headlines for all the wrong reasons. It was Sophie's daughter knowing that someone fought back. That greed is not always the last word. That a woman who was told to disappear, didn't. I sat in my car again. Same parking lot. Different feeling entirely. 1 year later, I opened a new company. Smaller on purpose. Different products. Same values. I named it after nothing, just a plain address, a blank letterhead. Because this time I was building it for the right reason. Not to prove anything to anyone. Not to get back what was taken. But because making something real and sharing it with people who believe in it, that is just who I am. Marcus Voss is still working through the legal process. That story belongs to the courts now, not to me. My story is this: the people who take from others count on silence. They count on shame. They count on the person they hurt believing that no one will care, that the system is too slow, that it's easier to disappear. But every person who refuses to disappear makes the next refusal easier. I didn't take back a company. I took back something they can never put in a contract. My name. And this time, no one gets to move it.